there's this documentary called David Lynch, The Art Life, which is a documentary about... The Art Life.
Art Life, right.
About the director of, Blue Velvet and The Elephant Man, in which we see him at work in his painting studio in the modern day. And then what we do is we follow his life as a child, growing up and becoming somebody who discovers what he calls the art life. And I think it's a fascinating documentary because it's focusing on his painting and this sort of strange sculpting stuff that he does and these kind of weird canvases that he makes. But actually what it does is it leads you up to the point of him making Eraserhead. He said that when he was a kid, he was astonished to discover that a friend had a father whose job it was to be an artist. And he was just, his mind was blown, in that very beautiful, in that very David Lynch way, his mind was completely blown by the idea that you could do this for a profession. And through photographs and early cine film, we see his young life. We hear about his mother and father who sound absolutely lovely, really tolerant and encouraging, if not overtly demonstrative. And we learn about his amazement at discovering, that art can be a profession, and his route from being somebody who was dabbling in art to somebody who ends up getting this grant to go to LA that ends up being at film school, and he ends up basically making Eraserhead, and talking about if he didn't get that grant, he didn't know, where his life would have gone. But what's really fascinating is that we hear all these little stories, and the whole thing, very much like the De Palma documentary, it's just his voice. He's narrating his own story. We hear all these little vignettes that seem to foreshadow all the work that he does later on. So at one point he talks about, my mother, I'm not going to do the whole thing in a David Lynch voice, it'll get very annoying. Relief. Yes, because I'm not going to, because you rolled your eyes. Although beautiful. Negativity.
I was rolling my eyes.
Positivity flows.
On behalf of
negativity goes. Please. Anyway, it's not good if you can't see the hand movements. So he describes how, when he was a kid, his mother dug holes in these mud pits and then filled them up with water, and he and his friend would sit in these mud pits. And he says, beautiful. And he describes squelching the mud between his fingers. And then we see him working with paint, basically doing the same thing. Basically now, a grand old man doing this same thing that he did when he was a kid. We hear him talking about, he does a black painting with some leaves, and then he starts to say, and as he was looking at the painting, he saw the leaves moving, and he heard the sound of wind, and he thought, and which is very Twin Peaks, because every time in Twin Peaks when you need an interstitial, it cuts to a shot of some trees with that wind sound, and he says this wonderful thing. He says, I thought, what an idea, a moving picture with sound. And you're going, yeah, David, it's called cinema. And then there is another, which I'm going to play you a clip now, of a moment from his childhood, which seems to foreshadow a particularly memorable instance in Blue Velvet.
One night, I kind of had the feeling it was in the fall, and it was pretty late. Usually, my father would go outside and yell, "John, David!" And that would bring us home. But this night, it must have been, I don't know, close to that time. It seemed to be pretty late. I don't know what we were doing, but from across Shoshone Avenue, out of the darkness comes this kind of like a strangest dream, because I'd never seen an adult woman naked.
It gets to the punchline in the end.
But that's exactly, he talks in the way that his films sort of, tell their stories. That there's a marvelous moment. That there's a clip of me interviewing David Lynch at the BFI South Bank, and it ended up as like an Easter egg on one of David Lynch's videos. And essentially, I ask him this very long question about, in all your movies, you use this thing about electricity arcing, and it seems to me that what the electricity arcing is about synaptic responses. And it's a very, very long question.
Really?
And I get, thank you. And I get to the end, I go, can you just? I know you don't like to explain what your movies are about, but is there something in there? And then there's a long pause, and he just goes, no. And everyone laughs, okay, which is hilarious, because he doesn't like explaining his movies. Incidentally, what that doesn't tell you is that I asked him the same question 2 weeks earlier, and he gave me a long response. But there's a moment in this documentary in which he says, I was making a painting that was about 4-foot square. He doesn't. I mean, he literally doesn't even do it as a joke. He literally says he's going to say what it's about. It was about 4-foot square. And then you hear him talking about how, when he was making Eraserhead, how he literally wanted to live in the world of... You've seen Eraserhead, right?
A long, long time ago.
Okay, but you remember... Would the word that you would use to describe Eraserhead is probably not beautiful.
No.
Okay, so but what he says is, there was the set, and I would just sit there and imagine this beautiful. I wanted to live in, and he talks about Eraserhead like it is the most perfect. So that what he really wants more than anything is to be living in that world of Eraserhead, in which he can just imagine the world going on with these sort of strange factories belching smoke and weird alien babies, and and the woman singing in the radiator with the hamster cheeks. I thought the documentary was great because one of the things it managed to do was, you can't ask David Lynch questions because he doesn't answer in a linear way. But if you allow him to talk about himself, he'll do it fascinatingly. And the archival stuff is really, really good. And there is another lovely moment when he starts telling this story about him and his family, and they're about to move away, and they go outside and the people across the street, and then he goes, I can't tell this story. And then it goes. And you're going, what?
This sounds quite annoying.
No, it's not annoying. It's really fascinating because it's what you want. David Lynch is never going to sit down and go, Eraserhead is about this, Blue Velvet is about this, because that's not what they're about. They're like poems. If you could explain them in simple terms, there wouldn't be any reason to do it. There's a famous thing that the only way you can ever criticize a painting is with another painting, that the only way you can ever pass comment on poetry is with another poem. Incidentally, I don't believe that.
No, and I hadn't heard that before, and it sounds rubbish and annoying.
But it's an idea, Simon, and and what Lynch does is, the art life is the world of ideas.
Art life!
The art life. I'm amazed that I watched the film and at no point did that joke occur to me. But now that you've said it, you've ruined the film for me. Art life.
Every time art life is mentioned or it comes up on screen, everyone, like in Cracker Jack, should just shout,
Art life.